Hey, welcome back to Mindful May. My name's May. Today I'm working on the Valley Jumpsuit, which is a free pattern by Peppermint. I went to my local printer the other day to print it out on A0 paper. So this is what they would call blueprint size paper, and it's going to be these massive sheets of paper, which is really helpful instead of taping all of those letter size pieces together. This is going to save you a lot of time and hopefully money. It only cost me $2.50 per page. And depending on what size you are, it's going to be 2 or 3 pages to print this entire pattern. For my fabric, I wanted something really lightweight for summer. This is a cotton linen blend. This is a duvet made by IKEA that I got at the thrift store for $14. I also have these buttons that were gifted to me. Maybe not my ideal choice, but I love to use what I already have around, so this is what I'm going with. Personally, I plan to use size 40. I'm kind of in the middle of sizes between my bust, my waist, and my hips. I'm ranging between 5 different sizes. So I'm gonna try to land somewhere in the middle to hopefully give it kind of a airy feel. Nothing too tight, and I definitely don't want it too big in the upper body. So we're gonna see how that works out. I'm gonna start cutting this out and get started. I've got my pattern pieces, and again, I am cutting out a size 40. I love that this pattern only has 2 pieces, 2 of these pant pieces and 2 of the bodice pieces, plus some pockets and interfacing. It's really very simple. For step 3, we need interfacing. I only have sew-in interfacing instead of the preferred iron-on, but it should work. And I'm going to line it up with this gray rectangle on my pattern piece. This was kind of hard to make the markings, but I did what I could. And then we are going to create a hem. But first I needed to find the placement of where to roll my hem. This was on my pattern, but I failed to make a notch. So I went back, put a notch right where that T is on the top and the bottom. And this is where we will fold back for our placket. First ironing down 1 centimeter, and then pulling that hem back to the wrong side of the bodice until you meet those notches. And we're going to sew down to create our placket. You'll do this same thing on the other side of the bodice. Step 6 is to create the buttonholes. So you can use the buttonhole guide that comes with the pattern. This helps you place the markings in the perfect distance. I personally like a vertical buttonhole, so I'm going to sew vertically instead of horizontally. That's just a personal preference. Making sure that my button can fit in between my buttonhole, and then proceed to make a buttonhole however you like to. My machine has a setting for that, which is really helpful. Making sure my button fits through. Step 7 is to cut a strip of interfacing. There's no pattern for this, but it turned out to be about 10.5 centimeters by 1.5 centimeters. This is for that back closure where we're going to put a button and a tie, placing the interfacing 1.5 centimeters from the top and right in between the notch. Again, mine is sew-in interfacing, so I just have to pin mine. Step 8 is to finish the back center edges. You can do this with a zigzag stitch or a serger if you have one. This is how I'm going to get my interfacing to lock into place, which is really helpful. And step 9 is to place the 2 back pieces with right sides together and line up the center back edges. And we're going to pin starting at the bottom of the interfacing and all the way down. We're going to sew this with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Step 10 is to top stitch the slit. Step 11 is to secure the bottom of the slit with a zigzag stitch. Step 12. There is a video available through Peppermint on how to do this, but I'll walk you through it as well. Instead of making my own binding, I grabbed some white binding that I had. I'm going to place the right side of the binding on the right side of the front neckline of the bodice. I'm going to stitch this on with right sides together, leaving a little tail on either side. We're going to top stitch that bias binding. This just helps it to fold really nicely. And then this excess kind of tail that we have will tuck in. The binding will fold towards the inside of the bodice. I'll pin that in place and stitch that on. Same thing with the other side. We're going to stitch as close to the edge as we can. And then personally, I just finished off my binding by pivoting and then going up towards the top edge of the neckline. Step 13 is to close up the back slit opening. There's several ways to do this. I'm going to use elastic thread and a button. In retrospect, I wish I would have made kind of a woven piece. It was just a little too flimsy, but it did work. There was one side of the neck hole opening that I didn't close, so I will slide that in there and then take it back to the machine and just stitch that closed. On the other side, I'm attaching my button. There is a tutorial through the Peppermint Instructions with a link on how to make a hook and eye if you want to do that instead. This is how the bodice is looking so far. Step 14 is to turn it inside out. So with right sides together, we're going to close up the bottom hem of the sleeve. And once we're done, just cutting little slits in the curve. This is just going to help it to sit a little nicer on the body. Step 15, you'll place the right front tab on top of the left. We're going to pin that in place and then sew 10 centimeters along the edges of the plackets. This is to hold them in place as we continue making our jumpsuit. Personally, I failed to do a forward and back stitch here. I thought this really was just holding it in place, but you will see a little bit of this sewing line at the end. So learn from me, sew a forward and back stitch while you are on this step. Step 16 is to fold the sleeve hem under 1 centimeter and press. Then we'll fold under 2 centimeters and press. We'll pin that in place and then stitch it closed. Step 17 is not shown. I just serged the edges of my pockets. Again, you can do a zigzag stitch. Another thing I failed to do on my pattern was to mark where the pockets go. So I am doing that after the fact. Just finding where my size lines up, holding my finger in place and popping a mark in there. Now working on our pockets, this is step 18. We're going to fold the upper edge under just 5 millimeters. This is the tiniest little fold, and this is towards the wrong side of the pocket. I'm going to press it, flip the pocket over, and then fold it to the good side 1.5 centimeters and press. At first I didn't really understand what I was doing. I was just following instructions, but it works out, I promise. Step 19 is to sew just a little stitch right inside of the serged edge. Cut off the corners. Then we'll turn it right side out. Press here and then press the raw edges to the inside of the pocket. Now I'm going to pin it to my jumpsuit pant pieces. pinning this in place. I forgot to do the top stitch first, so I'm going to pull these out and top stitch the top of my pocket before I sew on the pocket. Sewing on the pocket, you're going to make just a little square in the top corner, starting with a forward and back stitch. I'm sewing as close to the edges as I can. I just think it gives it a really clean look. Plus, our raw hem is really small. Sew as close to the edges of your pocket as you can. And finishing again with that squared off corner just for extra support. Step 22 is to sew the center front pants right sides together, and then the center back pants right sides together. You'll just go from the waistline all the way down to this crotch point, sewing directly off the edge. Step 23, with right sides together, sew the front and the back pieces of the inseam. I started right in the center and then worked my way down each leg. Once you're done sewing this long stitch, you can also serge it or zigzag stitch. Step 24 is to finish the ankle seam. We are going to fold 1 centimeter under and press. Then fold 3 centimeters under and press. We're going to pin this in place all the way around and stitch to close, staying close to the folded edge. We're on to step 25, attaching the pants to the top of the jumpsuit and the elastic waist. With the pants upright and right side out, we're going to place them inside the top of the bodice, lining up the front seams. And the back seams. And finally the side seams, and then everything in between. We are going to stitch this on with a 5 centimeter seam allowance. This is a wide seam allowance. This is creating the band where your elastic is going to go. Sew around, continuing to measure. I ended up popping in pins 5 centimeters from the end of my seam, sewing all the way around. This step gave me some stress. You need to cut off the top portion of the jumpsuit, this 5 centimeters of excess fabric. I had just worked so hard up until this point, I was afraid I was going to cut something, so take it slow. I have pressed this seam upwards, and I'm going to pop a few pins. This is in the back seam. I'm going to leave a little pocket for our elastic to go into. I'm going to pin all the way around so we can make this casing for our elastic to sit in. Forward and back stitch, and then again moving really slowly along here, making sure to smooth out the fabric as you go. And we're going to make the tunnel for the elastic. We're almost up to our last step. If you need better instructions, there is a video available on Peppermint's website on how to make this elastic casing. That is what I initially followed. At the end of adding our elastic, we will overlap them at about 1/2 inch. We're going to zigzag stitch over this to close it up. I'm just going to do a couple of lines just to make it really secure. and then close up our last hole. So starting from where we left off, sewing a straight stitch until we meet the other end of our opening. The very last step you could do if you wanted would be to add some stitches in the side seam just to stop the elastic from moving around in the casing. I am going to do this step because I don't like my elastic to move around. Just a nice forward and back stitch here to hold the elastic in. And she's done. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. It means so much to me as I'm trying to grow my channel. I hope you make yourself a jumpsuit and love it. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!